Okay. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending the HIPAA panel discussion that Tealium and Wheelhouse are hosting today. My name is Ted Svikas, and I've been with Tealium for almost 9 years. I work in strategy. I'm the director of digital strategy for Tealium, and I'm joined today by Paul Weinstein and Dustin Moore from Wheelhouse DMG, one of Tealium's trusted partners in delivering HIPAA-compliant solutions to the industry. I'm also joined by Nirmal Vimana, who's my colleague here in Tealium and has been for quite some time, who specializes in HIPAA technologies, healthcare, and pharma. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for joining this webinar. We're here today to talk about HIPAA, as we all know, and it's reared its head. It's been around for a while, decades, in fact, but the digital era has radically changed how companies in today's industries in many verticals regard HIPAA compliance because circa 2018, we had the convergence of privacy regulations and digital marketing and ad tech, and that led to inevitably a crossover with HIPAA. With many of our clients that Tealium and Wheelhouse serve today. So we want to talk about the impact of HIPAA in this new world of digital marketing and ad tech and how it crosses over. So before we start, we'd like to launch a poll and hear from you, our viewers, exactly what your experiences are with HIPAA. Namely, who's on the hook for not being compliant with HIPAA regulations, the safety rule, the privacy rule, the security rule. And if you take a look at your chat, you'll see that the poll has started, and you'll have four choices to choose from. Let us know your choice from your own experience. Who's on the hook? Is it marketers, legal and compliance, the IT department, or all of the above? All right. We'll give you guys a few minutes to take a look at that. All right. Click, click, click. All right, everybody's had a chance to take a look at that. All right, the answer, like most multiple choice questions when we went to uni, is D, all of the above. You're right. Everybody's got a stake in this. Your legal team has been looking at privacy and compliance for quite some time, as we've discussed in the United States for CCPA. But if you're in healthcare or pharma, they're well-versed in HIPAA. But that doesn't exclude the IT department. InfoSec departments are well aware of the security techniques that are necessary and the security and data minimization principles that are needed to fulfill HIPAA. And as of late, marketers are starting to learn this 5-letter acronym themselves. So it's all three of them, and they're going to be working in conjunction. That's what makes this so exciting. So let's get started with our panel. Paul and Dustin, I'll start with both of you from Wheelhouse to open this up. Let us know where this all came from. How did this all begin? Give us the history of HIPAA and its intentions, and tell us the background of it. Paul, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm not going to go into all of the history of HIPAA, but really a year ago, almost a year ago today, December 1st of 2022, the Office for Civil Rights, the OCR, within HHS issued their bulletin, which vastly expanded the definition of what both PII and then subsequently PHI kind of means. It includes now IP addresses, URLs, emails, and not only what was well understood before this was that, covered entities, healthcare organizations, pharma, and the like needed to obviously keep information really secure and private behind the login, patient communications, electronic medical records, and all of that. But what the guidance kind of laid bare, and what kind of surprised people as well, was, oh no, this is anybody who visits your public-facing website is now covered under HIPAA, and entities, organizations now need to treat the information that's being shared with these third parties as just like they would as if it was behind the login. So all of a sudden, with this event, with this guidance, this bulletin that was issued last year, put a whole bunch of organizations immediately on notice that they're have an immense amount of exposure and risk for violating HIPAA, and which is exposing them to penalties, fines, brand risks, the like. And it was a seismic event, really, in terms of kind of how marketers, compliance officers, legal, IT, MarTech professionals kind of thought about web analytics, understanding behavior on their websites, their marketing performance, and the like. So it was basically a year ago that everybody was put on notice, and organizations have literally been scrambling since.
Yeah, that's the OCR guidance of December 2020, and I saw the spreadsheet that came out of that, of over 100 healthcare companies in the United States on that list for not having proper data tracking techniques. And Dustin, I mean, you've spent years talking to many of those organizations, whether they were on the list or not. And I know that one of your first things that you say is data collection. It's critical. Talk to us a little bit about your advice after receiving this guidance. Did anything change for you, or did you just have more emphasis on this topic?
What this practically did, this recent guidance with HHS, is it really emphasized the need for covered entities and their partners to totally take control of their data. Now, this is something that we've practiced for a long time, but we've been having multiple conversations with organizations that are like, oh, can't I just throw a tag on my website? No, you can't anymore. And what we're really recommending is that organizations take a look at their compliance policies and fold that right into their data strategies. It's very important to control your data.
Yeah. I've spoken with a lot of legal teams, and for every lawyer you talk to, you get a different interpretation of the law. So this isn't a one size fits all, is it?
No.
Nirmal, going over, I mean, you specialize in the technology that's used, and also the strategy of the data governance that Paul and Dustin have exposed here. Anything to add from your experience when it comes time for the tech to come into play? Are you seeing a lot of surprise out there from healthcare and pharma, or are you seeing we expected this kind of thing?
Bit of both. I think it depends on the customer, their savvy, their history, and their legal expertise and their in-house expertise. I think the game has changed since HIPAA was first introduced back in 1996. Right? When HIPAA was introduced, it didn't take into account internet and the whole digital landscape that we're living in currently.
Right.
So, and what PHI means is also constantly changing and evolving. And that's something companies are struggling to catch up with, to keep up with. So I would say that, if companies are to be compliant in this new age, they need some fresh thinking, maybe even some outside the box thinking.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen that even this year, the new CPRA amendments for the California CCPA made a clear distinction for PHI and PAI. And it also really defined the word sale of data and sharing of data. So we're starting to see these privacy regulations really refine themselves. They're very responsive to the feedback they're getting from legal teams and IT teams. So this is not a one-time task. This is a constant interpretation of the law and how it intersects with HIPAA. So very good insights there. So that's where we've come from. Good history there. It's been around a while. We've had the technology and the security mechanisms to manage this. We just didn't know that we had to. That brings us to today. And I'd like to go back to Paul on this one. I mean, you've worked with dozens of clients just this year. What's your day-to-day like when you walk in? What are the kind of the broad strategy guidance points that you give to your clients when they shake hands with you and say, fix this for us?
Yeah, the environment's very different. Once upon a time, we'd be talking a lot, mostly to marketers, obviously to a lot of MarTech professionals, but now we've got compliance and legal in the room, obviously as very interested parties in these whole conversations. And really what we're telling organizations, what we're telling our clients is that they really need to take control over the data that they collect on their websites, how they manage that data, and then full control over what and how they share that and with whom they share that. What one of the really stark kind of reminders in the guidance was that covered entities they must have a BAA in place with any business associate, with any partner who's processing data. And this includes the likes of, for your web analytics or your advertising partners. And what was pretty clear was, these other parties are not going to just sign a BAA or at all, or if not a BAA that maybe your legal department's going to be happy with. So really taking control and ownership over how the data is collected. Really, it requires folks from across the organization. Marketers want all the data they can get, right? We have for a long time. And legal and compliance are asking, like, why do you need that at all? And then finance wants to understand, okay, like, how are our investments in marketing paying off, and like, how are we going to justify these investments? And so it really is a truly cross-functional problem that needs to be solved. There's competing interests across these organizations, and the technical solution is reasonably straightforward, right? Like, it's not the most complicated thing to solve for technically. The complication becomes in guiding the organization and these competing interests across the organization to a solution that works both for marketing as well as for compliance and legal and finance, and also for MarTech and the folks responsible for the tech stack. You really have to guide the organization, manage conversations and disagreements and interpretations. Yep. Every organization has their own interpretation of what this guidance even means. And so really helping them understand the trade-offs and the pros and cons of each, and which tools that they were using and relying on that were quote unquote free, but came at the expense of privacy. That now, how can they still use those platforms? How, if we can use them, how is using them different today? There's all sorts of implications, and it's largely an organizational challenge more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing from Tealium, Paul. It's, the tech's great. There's lots of tech out there. Yeah. But it's the people and the process that really need to be looked at. And when you have a modern day organization, people come and go. And so they're not clear on how practices are. So we're going through an age right now in the digital era where people are used to practices circa 10 years ago. I remember when I first started with Tealium, the first thing I noticed was that everybody was shooting laser beams over to Google and Meta and just sending data over there or to data lakes. And they would deal with the data there. And they would say, it's okay, just give us all the data and we'll take care of it. Can't do that anymore. Now you have to be stewards of data and make decisions on it before it gets there. So you're going to want to indemnify yourself and have an idea of precisely what you're collecting on which device and under what purpose. So this requires governance. It requires drawings, circles and arrows that show who takes responsibility where and when and under what conditions. That leads me to my question to Dustin. Dustin, the responsibility of the data engineer in this case, it takes a couple minutes to create a tag and push save, and away you go. You're now shooting data somewhere. Talk to us about that impact and what that chain of trust looks like, and what we expect from our implementers today as opposed to yesteryear.
Yeah, the major thing that's changed is that your implementation team, your engineers are part of that BAA change of trust. So first, we need to help them understand what that means, and from a compliance and security perspective. And beyond that, they really need to understand their data in a different way, right? Like, we used to be able to just throw a floodlight on, right? And send that data straight to Google. Mm-hmm. And we didn't even know always what Google was collecting. Engineers really need to understand and be able to control the data that they're collecting and how it's traveling through their systems and how it's being sent on to destinations. And, it's just really important for engineers to take a step back and ask questions of their marketers, of their advertisers, of the people that are asking for this data, really, how much do you really need? What does it need to be? What are we measuring? Are we measuring conversions? Are we measuring other things? And then build that into their compliance paradigm for how they're implementing this in their system.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, one of the predominant topics of 2023 has been the issue of identity. How do we identify someone? Can we identify someone? We've seen federated identity strategies emerge that are rock solid, compliant with the law. We've seen the big boys like Google and Meta really adjust what they automatically collect from browsers and devices now. Shout out to Apple, who's taken the lead in locking down some of this identity. This is completely related to first-party data, and the first-party data strategy coincides with the rise of the customer data platform. The CDP and identity go hand in hand. This is another way of saying, hey, healthcare and pharma companies, you get to own your data. You get to pick and choose what you're indemnified from. So let's talk about first-party data strategies next, because they're closely related to the HIPAA discussion. Before we do, it's time for our second poll of the day. And you'll see that come up, and I'd love to get some feedback from the audience again in the aggregate. Are first-party data strategies top of mind for your overall data governance and compliance initiatives? It doesn't have to be a formal one, but are you guys talking about this in your organization? Is it a high priority? Is it urgent? You'll see that poll pop up on your screen. You'll get the chance of saying yes or no. Or we're just starting our journey, or if you're not sure, and that's okay. A lot of us aren't sure out there. But please go ahead and answer that poll that's popped up. We'd love to understand the breadth of understanding of first-party data strategies from our audience. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. Okay, great. Thank you for coming in. We're starting to see some positive stuff. This is good news. First-party data strategies, if they're in place, they cause the organization to take a look at the omni-channel of systems and devices that produce patient data, healthcare professional data, customer data, prospect data. They also compel the organization to understand the modality of that data. Is it coming in anonymous? Is it coming in known? Has it been purchased? What is the level of indemnification that we should be concerned about? So we're becoming far more prevalent in understanding the impact of data. That's a good thing. And I like to say we're going through the golden age of marketing, because once you understand that data, you start to form a good first-party data foundation, and there are some wonderful channels out there for healthcare and pharma to participate in. So Paul, back to you on this topic. Organizations that are achieving HIPAA-compliant data practices in the realm of automation, in collection, in forming profiles, which are explicitly mentioned in privacy regulations, by the way.
Right.
And then the activation strategy. What does this mean for regulated entities? Are they just as nimble? Are they completely restricted? Because I've seen some pretty good marketing strategies from some leading pharma firms today.
Yeah. Well, so the organizations that are going to win in this new privacy first party world are going to be those organizations that have really great first party strategies and really are great at collecting all the information, all the data that they've been collecting, but really then activating it and managing it within their own systems, right? And using all the MarTech investments that we've been making over the past decade or so or less, really leaning into those investments and getting more utility out of them. What had been happening previously is we've been relying on these free tools for a ton of utility, right? For not only just collecting the data, but also making sense of it, helping us activate, build audiences, watch, how users behave across systems and all those kinds of things. And these were ostensibly free platforms, these third-party platforms. And I think what we didn't realize at the time was they weren't ever free. The cost that we were paying was, giving them access to all this data, unfettered access to this data of the users who are on their systems. And then they were being able to obviously monetize that. And so the paradigm shift now is that we can no longer rely on these free, quote unquote, third-party tools. We have to make investments in first-party strategies. We have to understand what it means to be able to not only collect, but then activate and understand this data so that we can replace that utility from those third parties that we were once getting with better visibility, but from our own data. And so that's really where the organizations that are going to win are the ones that are going to lean into those first party strategies and investments. All the tech's out there. It's more of an organizational mindset that we have to kind of shift to quickly.
Right. Yeah, and on the topic of free, Paul, I mean, nothing's really free, is it, in this world? In a lot of cases, freeware leads to more issues and more costs. I like to say it's the 80-20 rule. When you have a tag management system, for example, and you expect it to stay modern, you're going to throw a whole lot of services and consulting at that thing if you don't have a paid-for product that is being kept up to date, being kept modern, have all the latest security techniques. So it's not really free. It's the cost has been shifted to another entity, whether it's personnel or the creation of a new process. So as a quick aside, are you seeing freeware kind of diminish in the clients that you're working with?
I mean, everybody's casting a skeptical eye at it, right? We really need to understand. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of black boxes out there that we've been using where we have a modicum of control over kind of what's collected or how it's used, but we're never really sure. And so what we really need to understand is we have to be sure. We have to have systems in place. We have to have technology in place that gives us complete control, a complete visibility, right down to the attribute, right? And so that's where the solution here is to employ technology like Tealium's that helps us gain that really critical control over how the data is collected, managed, and shared. And you can't rely on the black box anymore because it puts you at risk. Yeah, and there's no plausible deniability anymore, right? Like you really have to demonstrate control and the fact that we've got these systems in place so that we can or cannot. And that's really what has to be true today.
That's true. And we're seeing it in not just HIPAA, but in general data privacy regulations requiring audits on a regular basis. Be prepared. A DPA might knock on your door and say, show me the entire data lineage. And it's not on your website. That leads me to Dustin and the question. I mean, hey, Dustin, when we expand our first-party data strategy and start to include relevant sources like a CRM, a warehouse, an app, these are all legitimate sources of first-party data that we need to inspect and to govern precisely. What's your experience in advising your clients on how far they should go? Is it a big project for them? Do they have a lot of MarTech that needs adjustment, or do you recommend an easier way to manage this monumental task?
Well, easy can be a loaded term, Ted. I wouldn't say that anything is super easy. I think what many organizations miss is that they actually have many of these tools in place. They've implemented them in the past. They've started a MarTech strategy and gotten it partially the way there. Right. But haven't really fully realized the power or utility of these tools. And so we encourage organizations to start with looking inside and seeing, what have we used? What have we done? If you're just getting started on your first party journey, that's where to start, right? Are we using Salesforce? Are we using Tealium? Do we have a CDP strategy, right? And how are we organizing, managing, and auditing our first party data? And then we work back from there into marketing. We read a statistic in Gartner's 2023 Marketing Technology Survey that revealed that the MarTech utilization by organizations has plummeted to only 33%. So they're spending money, they're not using it, right? And they're certainly not governing it. And we really encourage people to take that step back, take a look, and then develop a new strategy that really fully utilizes this technology.
I agree. One of the things that I've found is that by spending the time to make a blueprint of data, where it comes from, what it should look like, what the quality of it should be prior to it entering the business, you're halfway there with your strategy. If you can answer those questions and digitize them in tools and technologies for automation and productivity, you're very close to hitting the process that you need in place. But we do need technology to help with this, because it's too monumental of a task to play whack-a-mole with data over dozens of different systems throughout the organization, which is a good segue to Nirmal. Nirmal, you get to talk about the fun stuff. At Tealium, you get to talk to a lot of partners and vendors that have exciting new technologies. Up till now, we've talked about the past and how we got here. We've talked about the current state and what Wheelhouse has been doing to help the industry move along and maintain. Let's talk about the future and what you see. But tell us about your time at Tealium. I know you successfully launched our HIPAA practice here. You were the founding member of this, along with a couple of others. What technologies are you seeing emerge in this space that you're recommending to our company, Tealium, to pay attention to, and then subsequently inform and educate our prospects at large?
Absolutely. So current and future both are very important. I would say any technology that gives our customers, our future customers, better control over the patient data they are collecting, managing, and activating, that's a very good thing. Giving and gaining that fine-grained control is very important. But in terms of emerging, I would like to talk about pharma customers for a change. When we say HIPAA, we typically focus on healthcare. Let's talk about pharma. So we are seeing our pharma customers rely heavily on deterministic matching. And deterministic matching, for those of us who are not familiar, it means we know with 100% accuracy who we are targeting, who that visitor is that's coming to your website or another digital property. And customers like Tealium, because Tealium at its very core is a deterministic matching engine, if you will. That's one of its core tenets. And the benefits of deterministic matching even go beyond compliance. So let's say you're a pharma company, you're looking to leverage as much identity as possible. So they are starting to look at third-party ID products like IQVIA AIM-XR, PulsePoint HCP 365. So these are extensions of your own investment in the ID matching, if you will. And these products also themselves are built on deterministic matching. So by using these products, customers can exactly know which HCPs are visiting their digital properties. And once the identity is known of a particular HCP, other data they have on the HCP could be prescription habits, could be brand research behavior on endemic sites, could be content channel preferences, things like that. All of that could be brought to bear to effectively engage the HCP. So, and if you are a healthcare organization or a pharma company, it's important for you to know the person you're targeting is in fact an HCP in this case, and not a patient. You're dealing in sensitive medical data. If you inadvertently target a patient, that could be a HIPAA violation. So knowing with 100% accuracy that that person is an HCP is very important. And that's where deterministic matching plays a pivotal role. And I would say, we're talking about governance. Tech is just one pillar of governance, right? We also have to have the right people in place, the right processes in place. By people, you need people who understand the significance of PHI, who understand the risk that comes with mishandling it. And you need these people using the right tech and the right processes all implemented in order for their organization to be HIPAA compliant.
Yeah, that's very insightful, Nirmal. Like you mentioned, I'm a technologist too. I love hearing about technologies that say, hey, look, it's an HCP, he's on your website. Wouldn't that be great if we could say that about everybody? Hey, look, it's a technology salesperson, he's on your website. So this is a really interesting technology, but it's gone through the ringer. We've made sure that that's compliant with the law. Combining consent in these technologies and connecting them to data collection techniques and data storage techniques is one of the exciting new things. But I also noticed you slipped something in really, really nicely. You started talking about pharma. Pharma's really changed. Pharma and life sciences, you see it on streaming, you see it on CTV, you see it on linear. A lot of these exciting new pharmaceuticals coming out today, they're being marketed for the right reasons, to deliver better outcomes to the patients that need these pharmaceuticals. Talk to us a little bit about how pharma's radically changed in just the last 5 years, and medtech as well. Like, these medtech companies and pharma are starting to act like retailers in a lot of ways. So they have some extra responsibilities. What's your experience with the growing momentum of that market?
Sure. It's funny because pharma and medtech historically were not considered covered entities. So they were able to, how shall I put it, get away or not have to worry about HIPAA. But that's changing. The concept originally applied to health plans, clearinghouses, providers, and whatnot. But with pharma companies and medtech companies starting to work more closely with patients, the line is getting very blurry, and we are in a gray territory, if you will. And as Paul and Dustin pointed out, the latest HHS guidelines, they treat electronic data as PHI, and that's very new. That's earth-shattering, if you will. For example, a patient visits a web page relating to a sensitive medical condition, and we're collecting the patient's IP address. The website could be collecting that patient's IP address. So now the URL of this medically sensitive condition, combined with that patient's own IP address, now becomes PHI. And that's very new. It wasn't the case before, now it is. And let's say you're a life sciences company, your mission is to cure diabetes. And you have a patient site that talks about side effects of your brand new diabetes treatment. Maybe you even give patients the facility to search for endocrinologists in their zip code. Now you're collecting data to offer them a better experience, because why wouldn't you? You want to understand what the patient's ailments are, what their concerns are, so you can serve them relevant content to put them at ease and try and improve their health outcomes. However, in doing so, you are collecting things like search terms, URLs of pages, IP address, or some other PII. Now it's all becoming PHI. And now we've come to the point where it doesn't matter what the legal definition says. Maybe HIPAA doesn't say a pharma company is a covered entity. However, given the fact that you are collecting this electronic PHI, can you as a company risk inadvertently sharing this information with a non-compliant entity, an entity that doesn't sign a BAA and doesn't share in the risk you're taking yourself by handling patient PHI? You can't. The answer is you can't. You can't afford the negative publicity that comes with it. So it doesn't matter what the legal definition says, whether you are a covered entity or a business associate or something else. If you are handling PHI, you have the moral and ethical responsibility, and not to mention the legal liability down the road, to handle this PHI and make sure the information is handled in a way that respects patient privacy, and it's not used to target the patient in an insensitive manner, and risk falling into the wrong hands, really. So it doesn't matter what you are legally, but you should be prepared for this, because this is coming your way. You have the responsibility. Yeah.
It's almost like common courtesy. And, that applies whether you're out in the market making money on pharmaceuticals or healthcare plans, or whether you're a nonprofit. We can't get confused here. Like, even nonprofit healthcare entities, while they have certain exemptions under CCPA, for example, here in the United States, it doesn't exempt them from not being proper stewards of data and not sharing. So you might see nonprofit healthcare organizations still bring up a banner and explain, hey, this is what we want your data for. We promise not to collect anything we don't need, and this is what we'll use it for. So it's almost like we're seeing a convergence of common sense for data, regardless of industry. And that's why I think the HIPAA realm is so interesting, because it's kind of like a beacon of progressiveness for the rest of the industry. Moving back to you guys in Wheelhouse, we've talked a lot about technology here. Let's talk about the connection between identity and compliance and why that matters. Nirmal said a couple of things that really lit up the conversation. He mentioned IP address. Google's not even collecting that anymore. Why? What does Google know that we don't? Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the starting point is understanding kind of originally as marketers, we've been trying to understand our consumers, our patients, our users as best we can, so we can deliver more personalized experiences, so that we can optimize, user flows and user journeys and all those kinds of things. And so like data is just, it's kind of the lifeblood for a marketer, and trying to be able to make sure that we're making the right investments and giving our patients, our users, the best experience. And so really being able to understand at as granular a level as possible the folks who are, coming to our websites is still really important. And, so what that means is that we have to think differently around, what it means to both being able to personally identify folks on our websites, as well as doing that in a compliant way. And that this just kind of gets back to that first party paradigm where, we can collect all the data we want, right? Like we can collect all kinds of behavioral data and the like. We just have to do it in a compliant, responsible way. And what that means is having control over it. And that means that we just have to take responsibility for that data. And then we have to figure out how to activate it. And so, we just have to, the flip side of that is then understanding, okay, when we do share it, understanding that we've got a means to de-identify the individual data, to peel back that data so that it's anonymized in a way that's not violating anybody's privacy or
Right.
like. So
Right.
That's kind of where the rub is making sure that we're balancing those kind of two very important pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dustin, Paul just touched on a couple of techniques like, pseudonymization, great word there, lots of letters. Talk to me about other techniques for security, about IP addresses and location information. Like we don't need all of this. We don't need it. Contextual marketing is coming back with a vengeance. What are some of the techniques, really quick, that you're recommending to your clients in the realm of security that some of our InfoSec people in the audience might like to hear about?
Yes, I mean, first of all, like you can just not collect the IP, right? Google's already doing that. But in cases where, we want to have some idea of where people are coming from, we're recommending that you de-identify that IP address by removing the final octet off the end, right? Getting a little bit technical here, but by doing that, you roll that IP address up to a broader geographic level and can already start to de-identify. You can also use tools to aggregate that data into more generic geographic locations. And again, aggregation is really important because that's how HIPAA has classically asked people to de-identify groups of people, whether it's age or address or other personal data. Aggregating that data to a broader set that gives your marketing team the intelligence it needs without focusing down on the person is really strong. One great example of HHS was, if you combine an IP address with that sensitive condition and that person's in a rural area, it's very likely that that person could be identified. It's also important to think about hashing and protecting sensitive data. We recommend hashing and salting those sensitive terms and sensitive URLs to obfuscate them in your data systems. Sure. These hashes then can be used. You can use the hashing algorithm for your reporting on the other side, but the data is protected in flight, and third parties or organizations that may be outside of your chain of trust don't have access to how you hash this information and therefore can't reverse engineer it and invade people's privacy. Last but not least, we really recommend people design their data strategy to minimize the data that they need to send through their systems, right? And again, I think you spoke earlier, Ted, about a blueprint, right? Your blueprint really should be tailored to the outcomes you need. If it's financial reporting, if it's advertising performing, conversions, really map that out so that you can send just the data that you need to send to achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, one of the recommendations I give to my clients is emails should always be hashed. All that kind of PII should always be should always have a cryptographic algorithm applied to it. You don't need to know my email address. You just need to know that there's a email address that you can reach out to. And don't worry, the marketing systems have that same algorithm, that same hash code on the other side, as you put it, Dustin, and they can do the match. So we don't need to send tedsvikas@gmail.com across the wire. We can send a blend of 16,000 different characters that nobody will ever figure out. There's absolutely no reason to send free-form text across the web and use in our marketing applications. So I think you really hammered that point home. It's technique number one for all of you in the audience who are looking for some quick tips. On that note, let's switch back over to Nirmal and keep talking about the future. How are we going to future-proof businesses like pharma and healthcare as they continue to pervade the market with some really helpful advertisements and some really helpful personalization? If I'm in market for something from a pharma company, I do want to be engaged. I do want to have personalized communication, and I do want my data protected. What are you seeing out there for future-proofing techniques and future forward-looking strategies?
Absolutely. So, like we all know, regulations change and evolve. HIPAA, in the time it has been around, has gone through constant change. And the definition of PII, as we talked about, is also changing and expanding regularly. So if you are an organization that's interested in future-proofing against HIPAA violations, you need to be thinking about an independent data framework. So having an independent data framework means you have control of the data, patient data, whatever it might be, you're collecting, managing, and activating. If something changes in the industry, if something changes in regulations, you can simply change your strategy. And the independent data framework allows you to stay nimble with the changing environment you're in. I mean, companies always have the option to not activate the data, PII, on outbound channels. They're minimizing risk this way. But what does that really do to improve a patient's health outcome? Nothing. So I feel like it's in the company's best interest and it's in the patient's best interest to be offered a seamless treatment journey, if you will. And to do that, you want to also make sure you're not targeting patients in an insensitive manner. They want to be engaged in a way that improves their health, but they also want to be engaged in a respectful manner. So having an independent data framework means you can achieve this. By doing this, you gain control of your data. You can activate data on trusted channels, right? On channels you think won't abuse the data that you're sharing with them. And that way you're collecting data, not just collecting data, you're actually making the data available to try and offer that patient a better experience and make the treatment as painless as possible. And this is one area, plugging for employer Tealium, we really shine in this area. Tealium as a CDP can serve as the backbone of this independent data framework strategy. By using Tealium, you can collect data securely from different channels. You can manage and orchestrate the data that you're collecting. And, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of outbound connectors. So we can literally activate this data, the patient data, on trusted channels who are out there by the hundreds as well. So now we have achieved secure collection, management, and activation of PII. And, Tealium, being a right partner, or a partner like Tealium, can really help companies with the larger data excellence strategy, I should say.
You got it. Yeah. Lots of good new techniques coming up. And one of the big ones, I'm going to switch back over to Paul on this one. Paul, have you seen the new movie, The Creator?
No, not yet.
All right. Well, it's about AI that goes out of control and completely lays the United States to a wasteland. I can't wait to watch it. So let's talk about robots and AI.
Yeah.
A lot of this data that we've gotten, this has gotten the most exposure. ChatGPT, rocket ship right up to the number of users, put TikTok and Facebook and Meta to shame with how many people adopted AI. We're excited about this as a society. Sure. We're also terrified about this.
Yeah.
Now put that in the lens of a HIPAA-compliant organization where machine learning can really help, where we can take that. What's your take on AI and how does this fit in? Should HIPAA should the HIPAA crowd here that's attending this talk just forget about it, or is there hope on the horizon?
Not at all. Not at all. As a matter of fact, with organizations that we're working with, at least the forward-thinking ones, we're already talking about AI using and leveraging AI to help them with, in some cases, back office operations. But there's lots of opportunity, obviously, for us to think about ways that we can leverage LLMs, AI, co-pilots, and the like to really drive productivity gains and the like. But that is all within the backdrop of privacy. You know, at Wheelhouse, we've been experimenting and testing tools across the spectrum for many, many months now. You know, really watching it develop and evolve and get better and better and better, but always with this kind of like really thoughtful, like, how is my data being used? As what I'm putting into the system being used to train these models? Like, you know, making sure that we're aware of all the different ways that we have to control and ensure that our data is not being shared again in a way that's inconsistent with our policies or the way that we want to handle data. So obviously, you know, privacy is going to be front and center here, but like, don't sleep on AI, right? Like, this is something that the way that we think about AI is there's the bleeding edge right now, which just keeps going, and it's moving ahead at just a blistering pace, and we're trying to keep up with it, and we're experimenting with things that are like, this thing really worked or this thing really doesn't, and a lot of times it really doesn't. But there's also like the things that have been in the marketplace for some time now that are much more proven and much more well understood, even, that we're starting to actually build tools around. We're starting to build you know, tools for our internal team to use to help us you know, do really deep analytics on some you know, complex data set or whatever it is. But you know, I think it's important for folks everywhere really to try and stay abreast of it. It's moving quickly, and I think we've got to continue to, you know, experiment with it in a safe, thoughtful way. You know, establish policies around it. Again, going back to governance and what, you know, Dustin and I work together a lot on governance rules, both for our organization and for our clients. You have to start folding in what it means for governance around AI into that whole conversation.
Yeah, you know, well said. You know, and President Biden has reached out to NIST already to develop standards around artificial intelligence and what exactly these large language models can learn from. And while I like that idea, you know, rules are good because, you know, we shouldn't let this thing start reading our blogs and talking like us in the next couple of days without our permission. At the same time, this is going to take more than the United States, right? I mean, I could easily go to another country and develop an AI model where I don't have these rules. So it's really up to us as a community to understand what these standards are and uphold them and have it as, you know, a common law approach to technology. And I think it's the first time in history that we face this as a global community. So I don't mean to overexpose the problem, but it is bigger than simply a new law by the most recent president of the United States. It's much bigger than that. It's part of our entropy as a species to look at this. On that note, Dustin, I'm going to leave it with you to take us home on the future. You've seen a lot in your time. You've configured a lot. You've solved a lot of problems, and then you've seen, you know, a lot of the problems that you solved rear their head again because something changed. You know, what are you expecting to give you grief over the next, you know, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? What are you looking at constantly and monitoring and saying that's going to change? I just know it. I'm going to have to go back and fix this again.
Well, you know, you laid out already that AI is changed everything and is a global problem. And at the speed that is moving, Ted, that's going to continue to challenge us because as soon as we've figured out the last GBT, the last LLM, right, they've released the next generation and they're adding capabilities at breakneck speed. So I will just echo that you need to fold that into your data blueprint, how your first party data is being used, and you know what is going to be accessible to your AIs and what's not, I think is something that's very important. But also to echo Nirmal, you know, future proofing is also very important. And so you want to make sure that you have the personnel, everyone on board who can help you navigate this change. But you also need to have technology that's going to be flexible so that as things change, you can change with them and adapt quickly. And we found Tealium as a platform to be very, very useful in changing with us over the years. As we've supported our clients, regulations have changed, guidance continues to change, and then we can go, all right, well, we have the tools to change along with those and just make those changes for them in response. Regulation, local and national, is just going to continue to challenge us as marketers and stewards of data to keep up with all of this change.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. I mean, and I think the key word in the acronym large language model is the word large.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, artificial intelligence is only as smart as the data you give it. Tealium's in the business of surfacing data, processing it, cleansing it, and distributing it. But we do it for one company. That's not a large language model. When you take that data and you give it to another company, you sell or share it, such as a Google or a Meta, now you're talking enormously large language model because they have a global scope. And so there's a lot of things we can do with a first-party data tranche from a single company when you combine it with LLMs from really big vendors with a global scope. And so I think that's where the regulation's headed is, let's look at the dollars before the pennies and the nickels here. Let's start there and filter the way down and develop standards and let the big guys out in the world lead the way, just as Apple has been doing. I have a lot of appreciation for them, and Google has been stepping up as well. And I think the future is highly dependent on them leading the way for us here, because otherwise it's going to be the Wild West, just like we saw in the early aughts, where you could just shoot around a bunch of third-party cookies and do whatever you like on the internet. Those days are over. I want to thank the three of you for talking about the days yet to come. This was a wonderful conversation, and I learned a lot from it, as I always do talking to my friends at Wheelhouse, and especially from my colleague Nirmal, who's always on the cutting edge of HIPAA. So I'd like to thank you all for coming here. For those of you in the audience, if you have any questions for our experts here on the panel, please do reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation further with you and develop strategies for the future. Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Ted.